We're back to time and information.
Right.
Can I ask you about the Muslim prisoner?
Yeah.
The federal government deemed that the state of Texas did need to provide it, but they couldn't require them to provide it because that was telling the Texas government how to spend their money, and the federal government's not allowed to do that.
Well, no, the issue was whether or not the prisoner could recover damages himself against the state of Texas with the help of the federal government.
In the past, the Texas government didn't have to make remuneration for that, is what you're saying?
That's right.
See, I think,
In the future, Texas has to provide these meals?
Yes.
see, I think there's a solution to that.
Bacon and eggs.
I think the old method is still the preferred method.
Which is?
The family is responsible for a prisoner's meals.
Yep.
All of them.
Or do a bigger crime so you end up in federal court and then you'll just...
But if
get
you're in
your
prison,
meal anyway.
If you're in prison, you know, that's why Paul writes and says, thanks for sending me stuff, guys. Right?
Yeah.
The Roman government was not feeding Paul, I'll guarantee you. All right? And in fact, that's, I think, the right model. The federal government provides a place for him to sleep, but to keep him isolated. But I don't think that the government has any responsibility to feed him.
Or clothing.
Or clothe him.
They probably don't have, most of them.
So I think, it's again, see how these things have, and if you really want to look at the biblical model, see, you have to understand where did penitentiaries, as we understand them today, where did penitentiaries come from, and why are they even called penitentiaries?
Quakers.
Yeah, it came from the Quakers. Because you're supposed to be locked up, and by having the time to meditate on your crime, you would become penitent.
Rather
I think the Catholics had
than
it
more
even
efficient
before the
ways to commit it.
Right.
Okay.
Thank you for clarifying.
Well, the takeaway from the 9th, 10th, and 11th Amendments is we all have to do our homework. We all have to keep an eye on our government. We all have to know enough to ask the right questions. And I would dare say that if you attended some sort of an appearance by a candidate for public office,
Okay.
Yes.
especially somebody running for Congress or the Senate, or for president, you said, so, what's your viewpoint on the 9th and 10th Amendments? That would probably be a showstopper. But it's a question that ought to be asked, because it's central to what do you think is the federal government's business, and what do you think is the business of the people or the states? That's a defining sort of question where most candidates would not have sound bites that allow them to skate on that. Now, the rest of the room may sit there and go, huh? Say, what's the proper scope of authority for the federal government if you look at the 9th and 10th Amendment? And I would like to think that if people sitting there hearing that question kind of go, wow, that's a good question. What's the proper scope, Stephen? Go ahead with what you were going to say.
Before we move on, I am extremely shocked at something I just thought. Is there any way that the people can tell the government to get going and do what you just passed? Is there who is the person who tells the government to go do the bill that you passed? For example,
Voters 2 years later.
yeah, the thing is, like, on the immigration, who is the person who tells them you have to now do it since you passed it?
Supreme.
No, it's the
Supreme Mama.
Well, what does everybody think? You've all been through the Constitution.
Yeah.
We covered Article 1 about the legislative. We covered Article 2 about the executive. We covered Article 3 about the judicial. So the answer is as plain as the nose on your face, isn't it? I think part of the way I would respond to you, not being flippant about it, Stephen, is if people don't know this stuff and they don't raise this stuff, it never gets talked about. So it starts with people raising the question. And that's why I said the 9th and 10th Amendment in recent years are getting more attention than they have for a long, long time. And it's because somebody cracked the rule book and said, How come we're not paying attention to this? Sometimes it's enough to ask the question. John?
I'm still remembering your first thing you put up there, I think from one of the founding fathers, about how the just powers derive from the consent of the governed. And I'm thinking, okay, now how does the emperor fit into this?
I don't know where you're going with that, so help me
Well,
out.
okay, Steve was asking, well, how do we get the government to do what it's supposed to do? And I was thinking, okay, what about the emperor?
What emperor?
Who's in?
Emperor is the one who's the civil authority over all the nations. And the men who are in power, they have responsibility for the people, but not to the people. Their responsibility, in terms of what laws they enact and carry out, is to the authority over them, which is not the people. Like, it looks like they were phrasing that back when they believed that Jesus was the emperor, in the 1700s. But their responsibility is to Jesus.
Yeah, but I think, John, they also understood that at the end of the day, even though God would also hold the elected representatives accountable, God would also hold us as a nation accountable because of the fact that we had the liberty we did to elect our leaders. In other words, they were accountable to those who were the voters. And so there is an accountability that devolves to the voting public, and that's why I think when God decides to judge this nation, it will fall on all of us in a way that it's never fallen on all the people of a nation before in history, because we all bear that. God's going to hold us accountable for the fact that we have not held our leaders accountable.
Absolutely. Because, when you're voting, you have to take into account the emperor as well, and the kind of man you're putting over the people. He holds you, like you say, accountable for that.
So.
Okay. I don't know if we want to take a stab at a little bit of education here or not.
I just had a quick.
No, but education's a dangerous thing.
Yes.
I just have a quick question. So the 9th and 10th Amendment, after the aforementioned by John Civil War, it seems almost a moot point. It seems like you're reading history and how nice it was before the Civil War, but it doesn't really apply after the Civil War because.
Well, but let me give you a counter to that.
Okay.
You've all heard of the Miranda warnings, right?
Justin probably hasn't, but those of us who are old enough know what they are.
Anybody who watches TV very much has heard of Miranda warnings. Well, that emanates out of the Fifth Amendment, okay? There was a case in the mid-1960s that said, gosh, if you arrest people and they're in custody, you have to tell them what their constitutional rights are. How long have those constitutional rights been around?
Long time.
Since 1791, if not before. And yet in 1965, the Nine Wise Souls said, faith in Begorra. Maybe we better tell people that they have constitutional rights so they don't give them away. Similarly, about the same time, Gideon versus Wainwright. Our little buddy Gideon is a prisoner in a prison system who said, you know what? Nobody ever gave me the chance to have a lawyer. And I happened to be cruising through the Constitution in the prison library the other day, and I come to the Sixth Amendment that says everybody's got the right to counsel. So, don't I get a lawyer? And the Nine Wise Souls, when they got their hands on it, said, Sixth Amendment seems to say everybody has the right to counsel. Gideon didn't get that chance. Gideon got hosed by the system. Guess what? Everybody has a right to a lawyer. How long had the right to a lawyer existed? Since at least 1791. When did the Nine Wise Souls say that that right really meant what it said? I think it was 1965. Okay? So, I say that to say this. It all gets back to looking at what is written down and saying, isn't this a pretty important argument? Shouldn't we be paying attention to this? And you may be able to turn back the clock. Now, you don't want to hold your breath while you're trying to turn back the clock, but nonetheless.
Well, that's kind of like the food issue. Should the public be paying for the food of the prisoners? It's kind of the same thing. Should the public be required to pay for legal counsel for people?
Well, the Sixth Amendment says yes,
Yeah.
arguably.
Or it's just saying he should have hired his
Yeah.
own lawyer.
Should have hired his own lawyer, should be given the
That shouldn't
opportunity.
prevent it from it, not that we have to do it.
But it doesn't say we have to clothe and feed prisoners.
Right. But, I mean, I had a discussion one time with the former Chief Justice of the Oregon Supreme Court, Wally Carson. Pretty good guy, had his head bolted on, he's served in the public life for a long, long time, including in the legislature and so on. And he said when he was Chief Justice, the most difficult conversation he ever had with members of the legislature who were looking at budgets was, why do we have to provide lawyers for people who've been accused of crime?